This is an oral history of Myrna Ries taken on Wednesday, June 19th, 2013. Myrna, thank you for allowing us to come to your home and take your oral history. Let's get started about your ancestry. Tell me about your grandparents, great-grandparents, what you know about them, where they came from and where they ended up.
Well, don't know about the great-grandparents and the, the grandparents. I knew I knew my mother's parents, and I knew my father's father. I never knew his mother. She did not come over, the grandmother. Anyway, they were from Russia, and they were from Kovel, Russia, and they came to, my dad came in 1920, and with his mother and two siblings. He had a brother that died in Russia, and actually I think the trip broke his mother's health. It was just, you can imagine. But my grandfather worked for 5 years in this country to bring them over, so he brought them over. And
what did he do? What kind of work did he do?
He did everything. It's a shame. We've been doing some research on him lately, and I think he got into the building business, and I know that he ended up owning an apartment house with 4 apartments that our whole family lived in. His 2 daughters and myself and my grandmother, and he owned it. I have no idea how.
Was that here in Dallas?
No, Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn?
In Brooklyn. Park Place, Brooklyn. And my mother and dad and I and Henry lived in the front apartment, and his mother lived in the back downstairs, and he had 2 sisters upstairs with their families.
And what brought you off to Dallas?
Really my mother. No, what happened, my mother was pretty miserable. She wanted something more for her family. You know, those years, Brooklyn is the place to stay now, to be now. I have a grandson living there now, which is really full circle. But he had the opportunity. He worked on 7th Avenue in New York in the apparel business. And he was very talented. He was a pattern maker. And the designer from the business he worked in, called him from Dallas and said, "Abe, there's an opening at Nardis Sportswear." Nardis Sportswear was a big company here during the Second World War, and although we were not in the war yet. And she says, "Why don't you come to Texas? We need a good, inside man, someone, a production man." So my dad, at that time, going to Texas was, the family thought we were out of our minds, cowboys and Indians. But my dad hesitated, and mother said, "Just go see what it's like." And so he came to Dallas, and he saw the business and everything, and then he did some shopping before he came home. And one of the family stories is that he was Sanger's then, and he went to buy something, I guess, for my mother. And he bought something, and he walked away, and the sales lady said, "Y'all come back." And he came back. So he was a New Yorker Russian, so actually he spoke with a tiny accent. So anyway, he came back to Brooklyn and told my mother, it's too quiet there, I didn't like it. And my mother was devastated. And when my dad saw how disappointed she was, he felt he'd made the wrong decision, but he felt it was too late. But they called him back in about a month and asked him to please come, and we did. We came to Dallas in August of I believe it was 1940. When was Pearl Harbor?
41.
41. We came in 41.
And where did you live?
In Oak Cliff. I don't know why, but they put us out in Oak Cliff, which was definitely, there were no Jews there except us. But it was, and we came, I have to tell you, we came in August, and we came on the train. There's no flying in those years. And my mother and dad were very, very sophisticated, even though they came from a very poor background, and they were just, I think they were born sophisticated. So when we came off the train, my mother was all dressed in a beautiful yellow shantung suit with a hat and gloves, and my dad had on his coat and tie and hat. I don't know what him and I were wearing, and it was August. And they walked off the train. They probably nearly fainted. It was so hot. There was no air conditioning when we came. So anyway, we moved into this house, and we had attic fans and fans everywhere. My mother, she said she drank so much lemonade that she gained, I don't know, 20 pounds because we were so hot. And the house was full of, we called them thousand-leggers then. I don't know what the scientific term. Anyway, we had all these scorpions, bugs coming. I mean, they came in because they were hot too. So anyway, but we were, my mother was happy there, and I remember we went swimming all the time.
What was your neighborhood like?
It was nice, little houses, small houses, and we lived near Lake Cliff, which they had a beautiful pool, and then people didn't have their own pools, so we were at the swimming pool every day. And as a matter of fact, I met my first and best friend, and my mother met her first and best friend at that pool. We were at the pool, and Mother saw Terry and Sheila Sussman, and she said, "Myrna, come over and talk to that little girl. They look Jewish to me." And my mother was very assertive, and I wasn't. So she says, "Come on." So we went over, and Sheila became one of my dearest friends, and Terry became one of my mother's dearest friends. And I bet we weren't in Dallas more than, I don't know, let's see, August we came, it was probably a couple of months because we were swimming. So that's how we made our first friends. And then we moved to South Dallas from there on South Boulevard.
And what schools did you go to?
I went to Brown School. I can picture it to this day. Made some great friends. And then South Boulevard. We were on South Boulevard, but we were on the lower end because lots of the old families of Dallas lived on South Boulevard, great big house. The Wachowskis, the Glaziers, the old families lived on South Boulevard in great big homes. And at the end of South Boulevard was Temple Emmanuel, where I went to Sunday school. But we lived at the poor end. And my mother really, really wanted to move to University Park, Highland Park. She wanted me to go to Highland Park High School. And we did. We moved there, and well, before we moved there, I do have to, it was 1941, because I have to tell you that I remember Pearl Harbor, because we were coming home, we were still in Oak Cliff, and we were coming home from some sort of an excursion, and my dad had the radio on in the car, and we heard about Pearl Harbor, and I remember sitting in the back seat. I remember my mother breaking down and crying and saying, "Now my brother's going to have to go to war." And that was the Sunday that Pearl Harbor was bombed, and I'll never forget it. And then later on, okay, so we're out in Highland Park, and Temple Emmanuel started building their temple out there, and I went to Forest High School on Forest Avenue. Wait a minute, I didn't tell you about moving. I did tell you about being on South Boulevard. And I went to Forest for 1 year, Forest High School for 1 year. And that was a whole big Jewish neighborhood. And then after that 1 year, we moved to Marquette, which is where I went all through high school. I went my second,
What kind of
sophomore year.
activities were you involved in high school?
It was a different time. I remember some of the friends I have played tennis. I was never an athlete. I was, I won the Lens Award, and I was the student. And we just hung out. That's what we did. And polio was a big threat at that time. So in the summer, I still remember all the kids. We'd be in my house or somebody else's house. We'd play Monopoly for hours. We couldn't go swimming. We couldn't go to the movies because of polio. And that's what I remember of my South Dallas days, except going to the White Theater when things settled down with polio. Every single Saturday, I'd walk with my friends up to Forest Avenue to the White Theater, and we'd stop at Blend's Bakery, which was I guess they were kosher. I don't know if they were legit. We thought they were kosher, and we'd get a pickle. I remember getting a pickle, and we would go to the White Theater, and we would sit there, and they had, I don't know if you remember those years, they had, what were they called? They continued. You'd have a short, Hop Along Cassidy and all those, and Tom Mix. So we would see those first, and then you see the movie. And of course, we were all in love with the movies. The movies I had scrapbooks of the movies, and I read Photoplay magazine, and they were just forever. And my dad worked at Narda Sportswear. My mother learned how to play mahjong, which she didn't in New York. And she loved Dallas from the very beginning. And actually, after my dad moved here, he never wanted to go back to New York. So he loved it here.
So you all belong to Temple Emmanuel?
Yes. In New York, we didn't. There's a shore on every corner. My dad said they'd get mad at one another, so they'd build one the next block, and they'd get an argument, and they'd go to the next block. And when he went to Temple Emmanuel, he says, "Oh, it's so quiet. This is wonderful." So I was confirmed from Temple Emmanuel, and my brother was bar mitzvah from there.
Okay. How did your family celebrate the Jewish holidays?
We celebrated them. We had the Seder, and we got all our new clothes on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and get a new dress, and my mother would wear a hat, and we went to temple. After I married, I went to Sheriff Israel because of Myron, really. But anyway, and I grew up at Temple Emmanuel, and I had wonderful days. Howland Park was great. And that's where I made most of my lifelong friends. I'm still friends. They're the ones that are still alive. We are still so close. And Howland Park was great. It was just great. And the school, we had the Jewish table. We'd all sit at this table, and we had parties in people's houses, and Sweet 16 parties. Everyone had a Sweet 16 party, and we had dance cards, and we would dance. We danced a lot. And my teenage years were great, just great. I had wonderful friends, still do.
Were your parents active in the Jewish community other than Temple?
There was no federation. I mean, there was, but I don't remember anything with federation. But mother was active at Temple. She did a lot of cooking. She was a good cook. And my dad, the garment industry, I think they had an organization, and they knew everybody. And but he was, my dad was a very talented man. He played the piano. He never had any schooling, no schooling, zero. In Russia, Jews couldn't go to school. And he was very, very smart, and could play the piano. He could play probably any instrument. He could pick up in fact, the first thing I think he bought with what he earned in New York, Mother told me, was a violin for $10. But we always had a piano in our house, and he would come in, you can still see him come in the back door and go straight to the piano in the den. And he wouldn't even take off his hat and coat and tie or anything. And he'd sit down and play the piano. And that's my memory. One of my memories is my dad. And so he was more or less, he wasn't really a community person. Mother was more of that. He was busy working, and he loved to, we had a sprinkler system. He loved to be out there fixing. He could fix anything. Mother's friends used to call him over and to fix their toilets and their this and their that.
Where did you go to college?
Oklahoma University for a year and a half.
And what were you interested in studying there?
Are you kidding? I was 16 years old. I graduated high school when I was 16, and when I went there and they asked me what my major was, I didn't even know what they were talking about. My parents had, my dad had no education, although he was highly intelligent, and my mother only went to elementary school. And they were both smart. They were just smart, but they weren't versed in college and what you prepare your children for. And both Henry and I were pretty good in school, so they didn't really have much to worry about. There were no SATs and all of that kind of thing. So I went to OU for a year and a half because I always wanted to do something different. Everybody went to Texas, I went to OU. And some girls rushed me from sorority, and I joined a sorority there. And anyway, I had a boyfriend there, and then I got rid of him after the second year, and I quit before my second year. And I came back to Dallas, and I enrolled in SMU, and I didn't like it. I was so young. I was 17. And so I went to work, and I worked for a dentist. I was a children's dentist, and then you didn't have to be certified. I was a hygienist. I'd stand there with the water in the mouth. And I did have to tell the parents how much the cost was going to be, and that I really didn't like because I thought it was too expensive. Anyway, and then I grew up, sort of, not totally, and said, I've got to go back to school. But before I went back to school, I decided to go to Brandeis Camp in California. My friends had gone there, and so the summer before I went back to I decided just to go to SMU. I didn't go out of town. I went to Brandeis Camp in California, which was fabulous. It was, at that time, they had Max Helfman was alive, who was a brilliant musician, Jewish musician, and we had professors from Hebrew Union College were there, and I just ate it up. I loved it, and had a lot of fun, and fell in love, and that didn't work out, but it was fun. And I came home, and I went to SMU, and I finished SMU, and I majored in English literature, and I also majored in elementary education because Mother said, you have to get something. You never know what's going to happen to you in life, and you might have to work. And so I did a kind of a minor in elementary education, which was just a waste of time, I think. But I loved English, so English literature was my major. And then I met Myron while I was in school at SMU. Actually, I met him on my way to Brandeis. He was in Las Vegas with his parents, and I met him there, and he moved to Dallas. And so we married in 6 months, and we married right after I graduated from SMU. And I had a family, 4 children, 4 boys, and we lived on, when we moved, I didn't tell you, did I talk to you about elementary school? I did, I think, but we moved on Park Road first before I was on South Boulevard. I'm remembering that. That's where the school, and Brown School was there, yeah. So I was there first, and it was another Jewish street. There were two big Jewish streets. I have fond memories of South Dallas. It was.
So you and Myron, then you mentioned that you belonged to Share of Israel after you married.
Yeah. Myron was very
active there.
Only for my children. I'm not one for organizations. I mean, I've always done my part, but it's never been a big part of my life.
What kind of volunteer work have you done?
Well, teaching. I did ESL when the Russians came over, and when and also then when the Vietnamese came over. That was very interesting, the difference in the teaching Russians, English and Vietnamese. So I taught ESL. I volunteered. The most interesting volunteer work I did was I was on the panel of American women. And that was started by Tobian. I can't think of her first. Carolyn Tobian. And what she did was she gathered, and this was during the civil rights, when we're talking about the 60s now, and I think I only had 3 children then. It's terrible, I can't remember their birthdays, but I had 4 sons, and Carolyn Tobian got together what she called the Panel of American Women. And there were 4 panels, 4 Jews, 4 Catholics, 4 blacks, 4 Hispanics, and 4 white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And we went in teams, and we traveled all over the city and gave programs. And each of us, like I told the story with, I guess what I'm telling you now, except I stressed the persecution that my dad had suffered in Russia and the problems of being Jewish and the anti-Semitism. And the goal of the panel of American women was the black person spoke last before the Protestant. So it was the Jewish one, the Catholic, the Hispanic, the black, and the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And each of us told about our experiences with prejudice. And then, of course, the main point was what the blacks had to go through, because that was the civil rights. We were part of the civil rights movement. And so the black person would talk, and then when I think about the poor white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, they didn't take all the blame, but it was then that they had to sort of give the closing about how we need to change in this country, and we need to have integration in the schools, et cetera, et cetera. So that was, to me, it was the most valuable and important thing. And I was president of my PTA, and I did cards for Federation. And BBG started when I went away the year before I went off to college, and I was president of the first BBG chapter in Dallas. And then I left to go off to college, and trying to think what else I did.
Tell me what
did a lot in the schools. Tell
me about Dallas. What was Dallas like? You know, just thinking of it as a city. What was it like as you were growing up?
It was great.
And how do you think it's changed?
It was so great. It was a small town. And people knew each other. I mean, you walked into the synagogue and the temple and you knew everybody. And it was like family. I don't know, it was just, I just picture our house on Marquette. Our street on Marquette, which is in University Park, even before you get to Northwest Highway. There were no houses between Marquette, and we were the last street, and then of course it started growing. But Highland Park and University Park were where most of the Jewish kids lived, and we pretty much stuck together. We went to the football games at Highland Park, which was so much fun, and it was a peaceful time, although we were at war in the 40s.
How do you think the city has changed?
Are you kidding? It's another city. It's just another city. It's Dallas is great. I mean, it's wonderful culturally. One of my sons moved to Austin. The thing he misses the most in Austin is the culture of Dallas.
Tell me about your kids.
My children, okay. I have 4 sons. Jeffrey's the oldest, and he's a rabbi. Jeffrey is an Orthodox rabbi in Columbus, Ohio. He's a teaching rabbi, and he has 3 children, and he just had he's got 2 grandchildren, so I have 2 great-grandchildren. We just had my second one, so they have a girl and a boy. My granddaughter has a girl and a boy. So that's my Orthodox family, and they live in Columbus, Ohio, and they live a very different life than we do. They're very, very observant. And my granddaughter, what she does is she teaches. She's wonderful. I mean, she teaches. She takes care of her. Well, now it'll be 2 babies, and then her son, her husband is. What would you say? He does everything at this. They have a 600 student yeshiva in Miami. They're living in Miami. And he's their techie. He does all their computer work, but he also mentors a lot of the kids, the boys. It's all boys, of course. So Leia's always having boys over on Friday night and for Shabbos and for this and for that. And they live, it's like almost like a shtetl. They live in, they're all Orthodox, and it's really nice. It's very supportive, and she teaches school. She teaches English half a day, and then somebody takes care of the baby in the month. So that's Jeffrey. A year later, I had Adam, and Adam is 6 foot. How tall is he? He's 6'6". Very tall. Jeffrey's the shortest one, and Adam is an attorney, and he lives in Austin, and he married a girl from. He went to Oklahoma University. All right, I tell you, all my boys, 3 out of 4 went to Oklahoma University. No, I mean not Oklahoma, Washington University in St. Louis. So it was a good school, and then Adam went on to be a lawyer, and he met his wife there, and Jeffrey met his wife there, and Aaron, who is not married, he's 40, he's my youngest, he's not married. He did not meet his wife there, but he went to WashU. And David went to University of Texas. David was my non-student. The other 3 are pretty. In fact, Aaron, who is 44, I mentioned, he's still going to school. He loves school and working. So, and I have 5 grandchildren, and they all went to good schools, and thank God, they're all great. They're great kids. They really are.
Myrna, we have decided that with our interviews this year, in commemorating the 50th anniversary of John F. Kennedy's shooting here in Dallas, that we were going to ask all of our interviewees if they remember where they were and what they were doing and how that time affected them.
Oh, yeah. So you hit the jackpot with me. Well, I'll talk a little bit about it. I was, Ruth Andrews and I went to, I was always interested in politics, by the way, and active in politics. And the morning of November 22nd, we went to Love Field to see the president. And we were waiting for the plane to land, and the plane landed. And we were standing behind a Cox fence, you know those Cox fences, they're iron, and I could see it, they came off the plane, and everyone just went crazy. I remember I was near the fence, and there were so many people behind me, and I felt like, it's the first time that's ever happened to me, I felt like I was going to be crushed to death. Everyone would start pushing forward to get closer, because he was shaking, they were both shaking hands along the edge. And then they left, and they drove off. They were going to the parade downtown. And Ruth and I went over to this restaurant by Tom Thumb on Royal Lane up here, Sally B's, for lunch. And when we walked in there, people were screaming and saying, the president's been shot, the president's been shot. And we were, of course, we couldn't believe it. And I went to the back to call my husband, Myron, and he said, yeah, it's true, he's been shot. And he says, I saw him, I watched him from the top of my building, and Myron was a stockbroker. And over the ticker tape, it was saying, the president's in Dallas and yada, yada, yada. And later on, he saw it on the ticker tape, then of course. But I don't know exactly when I know what it was. He said they called him from New York. When you're a stockbroker, and the guy said to him, what's the matter with you people in Texas? Somebody's just shot the president. And he said, what? I just saw him in the parade. And then I think he talked to my brother, and then we found out that my dad had gone to, my dad's factory was right across from the 6th floor, from the book depository. And he saw the parade route in the paper, and he wanted to get movies of the president for his grandchildren. And he went to work that morning, and he forgot his camera. And so his, not his secretary, but his right-hand person said, Abe, go home, get your camera. And he says, oh no, it was raining. Too bad it stopped raining. It was raining at first for a while there, and he says, oh, it's raining, it won't be a good day to take pictures. And Lillian said, well, don't you want pictures for your grandchildren? And all of a sudden he just disappeared. She didn't know where he was. And sure enough, he had just decided to go home and get his camera. So he went home to get his camera. And my mother was still home. She was at home. It was, what time was he assassinated? It was around 11, 12. He was around noon. She was in the kitchen cooking. It was Friday, and we always went over to my mother's on Friday night for Shabbos. So she says, wait, Abe, let me change into something. I want to go with you to see the president. He said, I don't have time. And he left, and he ran, and he went over to he had found a spot, this stump over there in front of the book depository, where he knew that the car would be coming around, and he would have a perfect, I guess he knew. To tell you the truth, I didn't talk to my dad that much about it. It was such a trauma to all of us, and it was so painful, and it was so unbelievable. I can't even explain to you. I think we were just in shock. But anyway, so he came around, Granddad took pictures, and unfortunately, he was standing right there, and he saw the president's head explode, and he knew that he was dead. And he kept filming. I don't know how he did that. And then he jumped off, and he had his secretary with him because he had a little vertigo, and so she helped him. And he was hysterical. He was screaming, he's dead, they've killed him, they've killed him. And then, I'm not going to go into the rest of it. He found the Secret Service man, FBI. He knew right away that he needed to find people from the government, and they came up to his office, and he put his camera in his safe. And then the whole day was spent trying to get the film developed, because he had 8mm film, and it was very difficult to, for some reason, I don't know, they couldn't develop it. And so we went over to Mother's. Ruth and I went home, and I was hysterical, and I called the Dallas Morning News and was screaming at them because they had this terrible ad in the paper that day, and I just was saying, you killed the president, you're responsible, and stop my subscription. And I was just really off the wall, because one of the things was I campaigned for Kennedy. That was one of the things I did in the community. I sold poll tax. So anyway, the rest is history. And we went over to Mother's, and we waited the whole evening, and he kept calling and saying, I'll be home, we're trying to get this thing developed. And then it's very, very confusing what happened then, and I really can't be detailed about what happened, but he finally got home at about 10:30 or 11, and he showed the film in our den, and I didn't watch. I sat in the living room, and everyone else, Myrna was there, Henry was in Washington, and he was in touch with my dad the whole time. He was a lawyer, but so let's see, it was Mother and my kid. No, did the kids? I don't even remember if the kids watched. Maybe they didn't. I know I didn't. And that's what I did. That's what happened the day of the assassination to our family. And it's had a huge impact on our family to this day. Especially this year because of the anniversary.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Who were your role models? Who have been your role models as you've gone through life?
Well, I would say my parents and my brother were my role models. We had a very, very close family, very close. And I was very close to my brother and both my parents. I adored my father, and he adored me. He was cute. He used to say, Myrna, you should be in movies. He was a little prejudiced. And Mother and I were very close, and Sorley Newman Ungerman, who has been a role model of mine for years. She was really my closest friend. And we're close friends to this very, very day. And Roosevelt was my role. There were a lot of politicians that were my role models. I loved Franklin Roosevelt. I loved Adlai Stevenson, all the liberals. And I was always very, very interested in politics and active in politics.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I just want to say that Dallas, when we were here, there were two congregations really, and it was Temple Emmanuel and Cherith Israel. And it was almost like, the Reformed didn't like the Orthodox, there were more. There was an Orthodox too, but the big ones were Cherith and Temple Emmanuel. And the Jewish community, it was just, we knew everybody, and we were family, and it was just a nice feeling. I must say that we did not mix too much. I had non-Jewish friends in elementary school. I did. And, but Dallas now is so different because we now have a very eclectic Jewish community. I mean, there is everything here now, from Hasidim to reform. Now, Temple Shalom was the first breakaway. Temple Emmanuel was growing too large. And it was not even large compared to what it is now. But so they broke off. They helped another congregation start Temple Shalom, which was really something new in the community. So there was Temple Shalom, Temple Emmanuel, and Cherith, and Tifereth Israel. But now I couldn't even name you all the synagogues and day schools. No one knew about day schools, Jewish day schools. Forget day schools, and everyone went to public school. Except a few, a lot of kids went to St. Mark's and Green Hill, but everyone now, no one goes to public school, and which is, I think, very, very sad, to say the least. So there's been huge changes in the Jewish community, huge. It's bigger. There's so many more Jews here. But when you see someone walking down the street with a yarmulke, a kippah, or talis, or you see them walking to synagogue in Dallas, you would not have seen that when I was growing up. You would not have seen that, and it's nice. It's nice.
Myrna, thank you so much for sharing
You're welcome.
this
You're welcome.
with us. You have been a fantastic interviewee.
Oh.
Excellent.
Oh, well.
Thank you very, very much.